Saint Joseph Cafasso 1811–1860, priest of the Gallows, priest, theology lecturer, social reformer, confessor, spiritual director of St. John Bosco and quite a few other saints, rector of a post-ordination theological college, member of the Third Patronages, Italian prisons, prison chaplains, prisoners, those condemned to death. Joseph Cafasso was born in Castelnuovo d'Asti, the same village in which St. John Bosco was born, on the 15th of January 1811. He was the third of 4 children. The last, his sister Mariana, was to be the mother of B.L. Joseph Alemanno, founder of the Consolata Missionary Fathers and the Consolata Missionary Sisters. Cafasso completed his secondary school studies and the 2 years of philosophy at the College of Chieri and, in 1839, went on to the theological seminary where he was ordained a priest in 1833. St. Joseph Cafasso sought to bring this model into being in the formation of the young priests so that, in turn, they might become the formation teachers of other priests, religious and lay people, forming a special and effective chain. From his chair of moral theology he taught them to be good confessors and spiritual directors, concerned for the true spiritual good of people, motivated equally by a desire to make God's mercy felt and, by an acute and lively sense of sin. Cafasso the teacher had 3 main virtues, as St. John Bosco recalled: calmness, wisdom and prudence. For him the test of the lessons taught was the ministry of confession, to which he himself devoted many hours of the day. Bishops, priests, religious, eminent laymen and women and simple people sought him. He was able to give them all the time they needed. He was also a wise spiritual counselor to many who became saints and founders of religious institutes. His teaching was never abstract, nor based exclusively on the books that were used in that period. Rather, it was born from the living experience of God's mercy and the profound knowledge of the human soul that he acquired in the long hours he spent in the confessional and in spiritual direction. His was a real school of priestly life. His secret was simple: to be a man of God, to do in small daily actions. He was a popular teacher, actively opposed Jansenism, and fought state intrusion into church affairs. He succeeded Luigi Guala as rector of the institute in 1848 and made a deep impression on his young priest students with his holiness and insistence on discipline and high standards. He was a sought-after confessor and spiritual advisor, and ministered to prisoners, working to improve their terrible conditions. He met Don Bosco in 1827 and the two became close friends. It was through Joseph's encouragement that Bosco decided his vocation was working with boys. Joseph was his advisor, worked closely with him in his foundations, and convinced others to fund and found religious institutes and charitable organizations. Another element characterizes the ministry of our saint: attention to the least and in particular to prisoners who in 19th century Turin lived in inhumane and dehumanizing conditions. In this sensitive service too, which he carried out for more than 20 years, he was always a good, understanding and compassionate pastor, qualities perceived by the prisoners who ended up by being won over by his sincere love, whose origin lay in God himself. Cafasso's simple presence did good. It reassured, it moved hearts hardened by the events of life, and above all it enlightened and jolted indifferent consciences. In his early prison ministry he often had recourse to great sermons that managed to involve almost the entire population of the prison. As time passed, he gave priority to plain catechesis in conversation and in personal meetings. Respectful of each individual's affairs, he addressed the important topics of Christian life, speaking of trust in God, of adherence to his will, of the usefulness of prayer and of the sacraments whose goal is confession, the encounter with God who makes himself infinite mercy for us. Those condemned to death were the object of very special human and spiritual care. He accompanied to the scaffold 57 of the men sentenced to death, having heard their confession and having administered the Eucharist to them. He accompanied them with deep love until the last breath of their earthly existence. Joseph Cafasso died on the 23rd of June 1860, after a life offered entirely to the Lord and spent for his neighbor. Saint Joseph Cafasso was beatified on the 3rd of May 1925 by Pope Pius XI and canonized the 22nd of June 1947 by Pope Pius XII. His major shrine is Santuario della Consolata, Turin, Italy.